We have John McMullen hanging out with us, our Eagles insider, also covers the NFL for today's Pigskin. And today was the final day of training camp. So with more on that and the Dorial Green-Beckham trade, your initial reactions to the trade and what you think is going to be the result in the long run of the trade.
Well, I thought the trade was a good one from the Eagles' perspective because it's low risk, high reward. As far as how it ends up, I mean, that's completely up to Dorial Green-Beckham because he's got a ton of talent, but there's been a lot of issues with him dating back to his days at college and obviously in Tennessee because he was a second-round pick last year. And basically the new regime in Nashville, led by GM John Robinson, basically sold him for 30 cents on the dollar. So there's a reason for that, and how he admitted that, he said there's always a reason why somebody of that caliber, of that talent is available at this point. And the issues are, besides the fact of the trouble he had at the University of Missouri, his conditioning was suspect. Mike Mularkey wasn't happy about that. His attention to detail was lacking, according to people in Nashville. And he really just didn't dedicate himself to his craft. Now, he's a 23-year-old kid, and there's always the opportunity you can mature. And physically, he's a freak. I mean, 6'5", 240 pounds, runs a 4.4. Tom Lemming once called him the best wide receiver prospect since Randy Moss. So the talent, especially when you talk about on this team that has nothing at the wide receiver position, is pretty intoxicating when you talk about DGB.
John is with us talking Eagles football here on the Sports Bash. John McMullen, I'd like to know if you know who made the call first. Was it the Eagles? Was it Tennessee? Who reached out to who?
Well, I'm sure it was the Eagles. They wouldn't admit that, but they're desperate for help at the wide receiver position. They see the same thing we all see, and nobody's going to reach out for Dennis Kelly, even Mrs. Kelly. And I like Dennis as a person. He's a tremendous guy. He's great in the locker room. He's willing to talk in good times or bad, but he is what he is. He's backup offensive lineman, so nobody's picking up the phone and saying, I want Dennis Kelly and I'm going to give up a former second-round pick. So this was clearly coming from the Eagles' perspective, and they were willing to roll the dice on a guy Tennessee was sick of, and that's what it comes down to.
And who's more vulnerable now then? Is the Nelson Aguilar more vulnerable to not making the team? Is it Ruben Randall? Who's maybe the odd man out then if Beckham comes in and makes the team?
That's interesting because one is, I would think it's Ruben Randall, and maybe Peter King ends up being prophetic because we all kind of laughed at him when he said he wasn't going to make this team. And I think you should laugh at him when the landscape was what it was. But now that Beckham is in Philadelphia, it changes things. And even though Nelson Aguilar has been abominable, I don't know, use any adjective you want, the fact that he was a first-round pick, even though it was a first-round pick of a different regime, I think is going to save him. Josh Huff, I think his ability to contribute on special teams and the fact that he's the best kick returner on this team, and he can also manufacture touches. We've talked about that throughout training camp. So I think he brings something to the table others do not. I think that saves him, and I think Chris Gibbons' long speed saves him. So the odd man out in that instance is Ruben Randall. However, just from a pure production standpoint, it should be Nelson Aguilar.
John McMullen's with us talking Eagles football as the Eagles wrap up training camp today. It seems weird to say wrap up training camp when there's still preseason games to play and stuff, but that's the way the schedule normally goes. Let's swip over to the offense or the lineman aspect of this, the Dennis Kelly aspect of this. What indictment of that is him, and then what do the Eagles do to replace him?
Well, I mean, the Eagles pretty much indicated that they didn't have any confidence in Dennis Kelly. Remember, Dennis Kelly was backing up Lane Johnson throughout training camp. He was the second-team right tackle. And then when it became evident that Lane was going to be suspended and the Eagles had to come up with plan B, it wasn't Dennis Kelly. They kicked Alan Barber from left guard over to right tackle, and they're going to start Isaac Seumalo against Pittsburgh and hope he can get up to speed and be the left guard. And if he's not, it's going to be Stefan Wisniewski. So they had no interest in playing Dennis Kelly, and that was evident, as I said, after what they did once Lane got in trouble by moving Alan Barber. So this was an expendable guy, especially when you think about the people they have at tackle in the backup. Matt Tobin's obviously going to make this team. Big V is a fifth-round pick. And they certainly want to keep him around, whether it's on the roster or the practice squad. And Dennis Kelly was just a luxury they didn't need at this point.
Talk with John McMullen, our Eagles insider. You can follow his work over at 973ESPN.com and also follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen for all of his news and notes, whether on the Eagles or the rest of the NFL. John, over at training camp today. Today was the last day of training camp. But focusing on the offensive line, what is going to happen if this team has another injury? Don't they need to do something to shore up that line? If, say, Jason Peters goes down, or something happens to Brooks again, or let's say Lane Johnson's suspension is 10 games, and all of the above happen.
Well, I think you have to be realistic about it and understand backups are backups for a reason, not just in Philadelphia, but also throughout the league. So you're never going to be completely comfortable if a player of the caliber of Jason Peters goes down or Lane Johnson. But I think the Eagles as a whole think they have far more depth on the offensive line this year than they had last year. And it starts with Wisniewski because he's a great interior backup that can play all three positions, center, left guard, right guard. So you got that set as long as Seumalo can win the starting job. If he doesn't, that creates bigger issues. And for the swing tackle position, it's going to be Matt Tobin, and they like Matt Tobin better than Dennis Kelly, and that's what it comes down to. You're never going to have a great swing tackle in this league because if they're capable of starting, they're going to be somewhere else starting.
John McMullen's with us here on the Sports Bash as we're talking Eagles football, the final day of training camp, and yet they get ready to go to Pittsburgh minus some key pieces. Who won't play against the Steelers and who probably most needs to be in there but won't?
Well, it's been the usual suspects who haven't been practicing recently, starting with Carson Wentz, obviously, with a fractured rib. But interestingly, he's going to make the trip. Most guys don't travel if they're injured and not going to play. And people like Michael Kendricks and Jordan Matthews and Mike Martin, those guys aren't going to travel to Pittsburgh as they continue their rehab. But Doug wants Carson Wentz out there to go through all the meetings and get all the mental reps because he plays the quarterback position, and it's something you have to do. So that was a little bit interesting. And also, Dorial Green-Beckham is going to make the trip to Pittsburgh when he does arrive. He's not going to play in the game, though. So that's some of the things going on in Pittsburgh. And from Pittsburgh's standpoint, they're not going to play anybody. Ben Roethlisberger's not going to play. Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell. So it's going to be your typical preseason football.
John, looking ahead to that preseason game, how much of the offense can we expect to see? We only saw 3 plays from them in the first game. Can we expect to maybe say, 6 plays from them in the next game?
Double up.
No, you're going to see them for a quarter plus, Doug said. So a full quarter and playing into the second quarter. Depending on how many plays they get, obviously if there's a couple of 3-and-outs, they might even play a little bit deeper into the second quarter. But you're finally going to get to see Sam Bradford and the majority of the first-team offense for an extended period of time. And they should be able to have some success if Pittsburgh is similar on the defensive side of the ball and sits a bunch of people. We'll see how that shakes out. But, Sam talked about it today. at some point you have to get into a bit of a rhythm, and to do that, you certainly need more than 3 plays. So he's looking forward to getting out there.
Another thing that came out today, John, is that they've actually put Brian Dawkins on staff and given him a more expanded role. If you could talk about that a little bit, and then also maybe what impact he'll have looking over at Green-Beckham.
Yeah, we were kind of laughing at that because they dropped that bombshell at the press conference announcing the trade, and Howie didn't even know his title. He stumbled executive vice president of executive or something. But
right, just get him in the building, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. Anytime there's tough questions, and obviously we're asking about Beckham's history and the issues he had in Tennessee, the Eagles seem to want to throw Brian Dawkins' name out there. And he's been scouting for a full week, and he already got promoted. So God bless Brian. But, it's one of those things. Obviously, he's a very, very important part of this organization's history, and he's a very popular player. But it's interesting, whenever anything happens, the Eagles want to throw out the name Brian Dawkins.
John, I want to ask you as well, Brian Dawkins coming in here, does that signal that they're going to maybe consider more players down the road becoming part of the organization? Is this maybe a trend they're starting, or is he a specific circumstance?
Yeah, I don't know if you can do that, to be honest. And I know people, first of all, there's a finite number of positions. And generally, when you talk about personnel or scouting, these are people who've been doing it a long time. And they have a lot of experience, and they've made it their career. So players who've made a lot of money, especially, often don't want to do the work to sort of advance in that field. So it becomes a double-pronged issue. And then there's the issue. There's the part of it where some say that a player the caliber of Brian Dawkins can't really understand why other safeties can't play up to the level that he does. So that could affect their scouting acumen and things like that. But as I said, he only ended up being a scout for 2 weeks, and he's already promoted.
Rocketing. His career is on the rise. John McMullen's with us talking Eagles football.
Yeah, he was an intern. He's going to be co-owner with Jeffrey Lurie by next week.
Well, maybe they're just correcting the wrong in the Eagles fans. But this is deja vu, right? The whole theme of the Eagles this summer has been what's old is new again.
Yeah, it is. And obviously, Doug kind of mentioned Andy Reid, even mentioned him by name today, and talked about some of the things he learned from Andy about giving people second chances, mentioned Michael Vick, obviously in reference to Green-Beckham. And, Andy was very, very successful. So I don't understand a lot of the people that criticize the Eagles for going back to the future, so to speak, because when you take a step back, whether you like Andy Reid or not, that was the glory period of this organization, at least in the modern era, and you could do a lot worse than replicating that.
Real quick, before we get to some other questions of things that are going on around the league, John, I want to ask you about the running back position. I look from the first game, and Barner had 7 carries for 35, Cedric O'Neal 5 for 16, Ryan Matthews only 2 for 15, but he did score that touchdown, and then Byron Marshall 5 carries for 6 yards. That's almost negligible. Of course, Smallwood is back, so maybe we'll see a different look, but how many running backs do they keep, and who are the running backs that they keep in your mind?
They're going to keep 4, and I thought Byron Marshall had a chance to push Kenyon Barner for that 4th spot, but that's looking less and less likely. He's had trouble adjusting to the speed of the game, and like most rookies do. He might end up being a practice squatter, but it's looking pretty clear, barring injuries. It's going to be Matthews, the starter, Sproles, obviously, as the guy who mixes in the third down back, and then you have Wendell Smallwood and Kenyon Barner. So that's going to be the Eagles' backfield, and it's going to be, in a lot of ways, it's going to be backfield by committee, although they wish Ryan Matthews could stay healthy for 16 games, because if he does, he's got a ton of talent. And if he's out there, he's going to be a 1,000-yard rusher. The question is, he's never out there.
John, transitioning to the NFL, a couple of news and notes coming out today. Marcell Dareus facing a 4-game suspension. Can you give us some more information about that?
Yeah, he likes to smoke weed. What a surprise.
The wacky tobacco?
And an NFL player likes to smoke marijuana. And he's up to 4 games in the suspension. That's where he is in the substance abuse policy. Little conflicting reports. I heard he missed tests, and another report said he failed the test. But either way, it is certainly revolving around marijuana. It's just another indication of a guy who makes a heck of a lot of money. And for a lot of people who say it's not an addictive substance, I don't know. There's a lot of people who can't stop smoking it for a couple months to make an awful lot of money.
Over in Cincinnati, Brandon LaFell looks like he's going to be undergoing surgery. How is this going to affect the Bengals, who already are without no Sanu, no Jones coming into this season? It seems like also Eifert is still coming back from his injury. Is there anybody for Andy Dalton to throw to this year?
Well, he still got A.J. Green, so that's pretty good. But you're right. And they drafted the kid from Pittsburgh, Tyler Boyd, in the second round. He's looked very good, but he's a rookie, so you understand. I mean, Cincinnati, the worst part about their run is they've been a really, really good football team for a long time now, and they haven't been able to get over the hump in the postseason, and now they're starting to lose players. So they were arguably one of the deepest teams in football last season. When you talk about Green and you mentioned the guys they lost, Marvin Jones, Mohamed Sanu, and they're starting to lose some of that depth because they were so good, and that's just the nature of the NFL. So their window might be closing a little bit.
And another move that we can read into for days and analyze in 20 different ways, the 49ers signed Christian Ponder as one of their quarterbacks. And so, first of all, good for Christian Ponder to get back in the NFL, get a little paycheck here and there. But on the flip side, what does this mean about the quarterback competition? We saw no Colin Kaepernick in the first game. Blaine Gabbert looked pretty miserable overall. So does this mean that Chip Kelly and the 49ers are unhappy with the quarterback position, or is Ponder just there just in case?
Well, I'll tell you, if Chip Kelly can make Christian Ponder into an NFL quarterback, I will go on record to say his offense is truly quarterback-proof. So if he's capable of doing that, this was the 6th day Colin Kaepernick hasn't thrown at 49ers practice. They're calling it a dead arm. I think it's more of he has no interest in playing for that organization and would rather sit on the sideline, sort of like RG3 did last year in Washington, collect his $11 million and then go his own way after the season. I think that's what's going on in San Francisco. Blaine Gabbert is going to be the starter. And I joked today that Jake Locker better check his phone because they're just collecting bad quarterbacks from the 2011 draft. Because you have Gabbert, Ponder, Jake Locker's got to be next.
Oh, my goodness. John, you're giving me bad memories
terrible
now.
Quarterbacks happen in 3. John McMullen talking Eagles football with us here on 97.3. Well, John, let's wrap up by asking you which celebrity was in camp today or what were the celebrity sightings, because I know Julie Johnson was there, right? And, of course, it helps that she's engaged to be married to Zach
I was
Ertz.
busy working. I didn't see. I saw Jim Cramer yesterday.
Right, Mad Money.
Yeah. Mad Money, CNBC. I did not see Julie today, but we were bombarded on the practice field with Dorial Green-Beckham news, so we were all had to run back to the media house and run back. So it was a very busy day at the NovaCare complex.
So if this is the last day of training camp, which basically means this is the last day of some of the sponsored tents and various people walking around, then practice schedule, how does that go moving forward? And then the sub-question of that is, have they done the right thing by moving training camp from Lehigh to the NovaCare complex?
Well, from my standpoint or the people's standpoint? From my standpoint, they've done the right thing. From the fan standpoint, no. It's basically they had 2 open practices, so at Lincoln Financial Field. So if you're a diehard fan of this team and this organization, there's not much access any longer to where you can see it. Basically, the day-to-day practices at Novacare are open to season ticket holders and VIPs, and that's it as far as the fans go. So it's bad for them, good for us. And from now, the worst part for not only the media but also the fans is practices are now we can't watch them in full. So basically, you get to watch individual drills, and that's it. And everything's closed down from that point forward.
And we should point out that's no different than it normally is. I mean, that's the way it is.
No, that's no different than it normally is. But that's the difference between training camp practices, which are all open to the media, the entire practice, and now it shifts down to just the individual work.
John McMullen on 97.3, ESPN.com, Eagles Insider. You can follow him at JF McMullen for all the news on the Eagles. He also covers the NFL for today's Pigskin. John, catch you tomorrow.
Hey, thank you, guys.